Welcome to No Master, No Slave. A show that seeks to reveal the hidden aspects of our world. History, philosophy, science, spirituality, and the truth of that which is. No master, no slave.
Welcome to No Masters and No Slaves with Mike and Zach.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Zach.
And today we'll be defining terms from what is violence, what is force, what is no masters and no slaves, being your own ruler of your own self and not ruling others.
Let's do it, man. I think a lot of people out there are kind of confused in all these different social expressions of how to live, and there's a lot of violence that people don't know is violent and can really get complicated looking at something that's actually really simple. We shouldn't steal from each other. Don't steal life, don't steal liberty, and don't steal property, and also don't steal worldview, don't lie. And it really just boils down to that. Non-aggression principle. Don't harm people, don't steal things. And I think that from that we can build a really awesome world if we just can kind of define these terms and live with it.
Yeah, and then non-aggression principle mixed with defensive force when needed. That way you're not being stepped upon. You don't. It's good to be peaceful, but when someone's threatening your physical body and you've done no harm to them or not threatened them in any way, you have the absolute right, natural law right, universal right, whatever you like to call it. It's the same thing. It's the law of the Creator. You have that right to defend yourself, and you should. Otherwise, tyranny will run amok and it will run over you. It will step on you and it will do what it wants with you.
Absolutely. And those are the two pillars that we have to beat this drum of these simple principles of truth, of that which is. And there's these two pillars, and one of them is don't aggress on people, and the other one is if you're being aggressed on or someone else is, you've got the right to defend yourself. And if we can just beat that into people, not like violently beat, but beat that drum to people.
Forcefully beat it.
Passionately communicate that, compassionately and passionately communicate that to as many people as possible. I mean, it's a trying time, It reminds me of the Revolutionary War, the spirit that's going on all over the world right now, as people are getting real fed up with the totalitarian tiptoes in their region, and are starting to want to rise up against it. But we need to make sure that people understand what got us here, so that they're not just reactionary with their response to this oppression, so that they know the philosophy of why we're experiencing this suffering, and how we can resist it, and then build cool models like Agorism. Agorism's a cool model to work with.
Absolutely. You want to define that, or?
All right. Well, I got a Wikipedia definition here. I'll just read off of. Agorism is a libertarian social philosophy that advocates creating a society in which all relations between people are voluntary exchanges by means of counter-economics. Okay, this is kind of a confusing. Basically, in libertarians in there, and people might be thinking like some type of political ideology. This is basically just saying it's in a society where things are voluntary and violence and aggression aren't used to dominate the society.
Mm-hmm. I just want to put in. I'm going to add in one thing. I was reading from a recent book. It's called The Conscious Resistance by John Vives and Derek Brose. They were talking about agorism and actually how state-funded capitalism, communism, pretty much any form of economy has been the only reason it's even lasted is because the state has always had to get involved. It would have caved in on itself otherwise. And people talk about a free market. No, we don't have a free market. I mean, we could have a real free market if we were left alone, but it's it's constantly watched over, and if you don't do A, B, or C right, then some thug might take you away or fine you or steal something from you.
But doesn't the state keep all the chaos away? I mean, if we didn't have a state, wouldn't there just be violence all over the streets and people just killing each other left and right? I mean, isn't that what we need a state for?
I know, because we've seemed to avoid that so well in our society. Especially with the...
I'm always pitching this idea of not having a violent state in a society, and one of the main kickbacks I get is like, well, wouldn't it just be total chaos? And a lot of people don't know about democide. That's a good word to look up. Democide is death by one's own government, and oh, by the way, it's documented to be the number one cause of murder over the past 100 years. Is not even including murder by some other government during war. This is, in the world, death by one's own government is the number one cause of murder. So there's a big threat there. And then I guess a counter argument that people would give is, well, this is America. America would never kill its own people. We're a moral society.
Nor would Hitler burn down the Reichstag. Nor would any other totalitarian regime who wants power and control turn on its own people. I mean, everywhere from Rome to modern day, this has happened. Even it's been shown in the Gulf of Tonkin that was a completely false notion of any attack on any U.S. vessel. It was just propaganda to be used so we could get involved in Vietnam and get the war machine cranking again, get the money flowing, make some weapons dealers rich, and the same type of thing. I'm sure there were natural resources ripped from that place as well, as there always are. And there could be also another more esoteric type agenda there as well. And all esoteric means is more hidden. It's more like the innermost things that the general public is not aware of. Like, for example, there's an esoteric Christianity and there's an exoteric, which is just the normal Christianity that would be the masses are used to. That's what they understand, not the more hidden version of it. Just as there could be almost esoteric of any type of religion has more esoteric teachings, and that's where the true, more natural law-based teachings come from, and that's where their greatest teachings do come from, is those. But then they've been diluted down for reasons of control, reasons of manipulation, reasons of confusion, also to dilute people away from the truth and to get them to externalize their own power. Because now you have to go through a middleman, you have to go through a priest, you have to go through some intermediary to learn this knowledge. If you ever learn the knowledge.
Have you ever heard people talk about, the truth is written on your heart?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just recently I learned that there's neurons in the heart, like there are in the brain. And I've learned about heart math, and I got to meet some people at the Free Your Mind conference who do heart healing sessions and different stuff like that, and learned about intuition. And there's all these very long books and ancient teachings that, like you were saying, at the core, they're teaching this golden rule, And I like how Mark Passio puts it. He kind of puts it in the apophatic way. He puts it in the way in which you would not want it done to yourself. He says, "Do not do to others that which you would not want done to yourself." And I think that's a really good point. And if you want to boil it down even further, it goes to just don't steal. Don't steal life, liberty, or property, or worldview. And go ahead.
I just wanted to it just goes upon what you were saying. It's all about a form of theft. All violence is based upon theft, taking property. If you hit someone, you take their physical health. If there's a sexual act done to a person without their consent, you're taking their sexuality from them. If you take someone's money from them through taxation, you're taking their work, their labor, their monetary gain from their own blood, sweat, and tears, or their own creative input to something. It's all really about theft when you really think about it. And it's amazing when simple terms can really help you grasp really important concepts. And they're simple concepts. They really are. Unfortunately, people think some concepts don't apply to that strange thing we call the government, which has these strange rituals that I mean, they're really, when you really look at it from an objective view, it's quite a long, drawn-out process that doesn't get anywhere, does the same thing. I mean, it looks just like another cult, really. It's a big cult. That's probably why people don't notice it. It's probably the biggest one out there. And a lot of what Larkin Roses talked about is he's done some great videos on government and how it's just there should be no human, bottom line, there should be no human being or set of people to have rights that others do not have, or that have additional rights that others do not have, or to even draw arbitrary lines on a map and say this is the place I own, this is the place you own. And there's nothing wrong with property. Property is inherent for all people, and it's very important. I own my body as do you, and you own that space you're living in now. It's like people want to talk about Native Americans, how well, they didn't own the land. Well, right, but they were currently in use of the land. Whatever their tribe was living in, they viewed that as their property. They didn't view it as disconnected, I own the land. No, this is my property, though. They viewed their well, no, go ahead if you wanted to say something.
Well, no, I think that defining property would probably be a good thing, because if we're trying to get real simple about this and trying to show how government is immoral and violent, and we say that don't steal life, liberty, or property. Well, don't steal life, that's pretty self-explanatory. Don't steal liberty, I mean, that makes sense. Now, don't steal property. This is where people get confused, because, slaves, they considered them property. Or, if you own, if you're a king, you consider, all the people that are under you your property. Or if you own a whole bunch of land and people are working on it, maybe all that land, maybe 500 miles of land is your property and all the people on it is your property. So I think we should define property a little bit here.
I agree. That's it. There's definitely been a bad that term has gotten a bad rap just because of how it's been used as a tool to, like you said, own people or just an unfair amount of ownership. Like, there are no reason 80 individuals need to own most of the planet, or some small. Actually, hold on 1 second. Sorry, I got interrupted for a second. You can continue.
Oh, that's okay, man. I would say that if I was going to define property, it's that which I've worked to achieve and that I'm using, that I'm occupying, or I'm personally, directly, physically using it. I can't say that I've got these slaves working on this land, so I'm using it. No, I'm not. I've violently have taken the liberty from these people. So if property is when there's no violence involved, and it's being used outside of the application of violence, and when you're not actually using it, and or when violence is involved, it's no longer your property. You no longer have a right to that because you've used violence to acquire that. If you stole it, it's not your property. If at any point in time someone's liberty is taken away because of what you call your property, then it's not your property. I think that's a good thing to kind of define there, is what is and what's not property.
Mm-hmm. And also how was it gotten? That's really, that's another misconception, is that whoever threw the first punch or whoever did the first act doesn't matter. Like, say a fight happens and it doesn't matter who did the first thing. No, that's the most important thing that does matter. Is that you have two people and one has to make the choice to cause violence. The other person is, if they're just peacefully standing there talking, for example, there might even be a heated discussion, but that gives no right to just lash out to someone with physical force or some other type of, well, I don't even want to call it. See, that's when force gets converted to violence, is whenever you throw that in. So, say that first person hits the other person, that would become violence. And if the other person defended themselves, that would be defensive force.
Wait, so you're telling me that if you punched me in the face and then I punch you in the face and then jump on top of you and start beating you up, I'm not using violence?
Right, yeah.
Okay. See, I agree with you, but that's I was just having a conversation with a guy, the other day about this, and that's something that I think the distinction between force and violence, that's another one. I mean, it's these definitions. What is the difference between defensive force and violence? If people could really understand that there is a distinction between those two things, and that who threw the first punch matters, and it would really, it would almost become clear that something like a police force that is taking someone away and putting them in a cage for having a plant is clearly a violent action. Because
But Zach, what if I saw you smoking a plant and I talked to my community and we decided that we're gonna throw you in my basement for about 10 years because we'll throw a little, fake trial thing on. Maybe we'll get together and you can sit there and we'll tell you how bad you've been, and we'll tell you that because you smoked this plant and we view that it's immoral to do, now we'll throw you in a cage in a basement. Yeah, if you told that to anybody, they'd think you're totally insane, totally crazy about what you're doing. Yet that happens every single day with throwing people in the prison system. And then as bad as much slavery that exists already in the world, slavery gets very overt there. You're thrown in a cage. They make corporations and governments make a ton off of you, and you don't make a thing there. They tell you what to do, what work to do. Not to mention, there's just the whole thing is just completely immoral and evil. But hey, if I wrote on a piece of paper that looked really official, just wrote my name down, and maybe I got some other of my friends to write their signatures down, and we all decided that, well, this might give us a right to go put you in that cage and get some fancy little stamp, put that on there, and then, hand it to you, tell you that you need to follow this piece of paper, or, well, gotta throw you in that cage. Because me and my friends decided that it's not right to do, even though we have no right to do that. No one has that right to do.
So the moral relativism becomes more easily accepted when there's more people, when the majority of the people in a society agree with the immoral behavior because they relatively say, okay, we all think that this is moral. To violently do this to somebody who's caused no harm. No victim, no crime. There's no victim here. This person's not done anything wrong to another person. But we've all decided that they can't have this plant. So we justify that because there's enough of us that decide it. I mean, that's democracy, right?
Yeah, mob rule.
Yeah, mob rule, right? And I mean,
because it's a bunch of people who are religiously following something that a lot of the rest of the nation doesn't even agree with. I mean, if you just look realistically at the numbers, who have people voting and who does what, it's not, there's no reason you should ever have to follow something because your neighbor thought it would be best for you, or it's best for the country, or it's best for the state. It's not fair. What's right and in line with universal and natural law is for you to be a free individual and make your own choices, be your own master, not have some exterior body telling you what to do and what not to do. And it's just, even just going back onto the cannabis thing, you have states within our own country. It's this weird kind of, some states are legalized, some states are medically okay, but if you travel in this, piece of land, now it becomes bad. Just because you move from one piece of land to another piece of land, and that is how ridiculous man's law can be at times. It is never concrete. It's always shifting. It's always changing, and the whims of the people, or the whims of, usually not the people, it's just usually the whims of corporations and governments and whoever runs the system in the first place, the so-called elite, the most unelite people of them all.
Okay, so in this collectivized system that's got a hierarchy and it's got a centralized power that comes up to a point on top of this like pyramid type structure. We've got some examples, or I guess a lot of examples, where they use violent force to lock people in cages that have caused no harm to anyone else. But aren't there a lot of really good examples where people are out there doing violence and harming people, and then this organized defensive force system that they have a monopoly on comes in and actually saves and helps people? I mean, so is there a way that we can take the things that are positive about an organized defensive force and incorporate it into a system that's not based in violence, that's not based in following orders without thinking for oneself about whether or not it's right or wrong? I mean, can we have a well-organized defensive force system within communities?
Absolutely, as long as it's based on the key principle of being voluntary and not coercion based. If it's based upon coercion, it is always wrong. I mean, that's what a militia is all about, and that's what you could do. For example, you could have, I mean, especially with the internet, you could have, let's take the United States for example. Let's say we became all well-connected small communities, scattered all over the place, but we're all connected to the internet, and say there was an invading force or even an internal force that was a problem. We decided that defensive force needs to be taken, and there could be a call to arms, and if there were more people were needed, you could raise an army, just like the founders did in the American Revolution. Of course, unfortunately, the army stayed there. That's where it went bad, because the army should dissolve back into a peaceful militia, and then it doesn't become a problem. But when it stays and it doesn't flow back into what it was in its original state, that's when it becomes a problem. Because then that creates this static military that just starts going out of control because it has nothing to fight. So it starts looking for enemies.
Okay,
for reasons to justify its existence.
So now we've got another word that's introduced here that's got a lot of bad connotations I think should be defined, and that's a militia. A militia with a capital M, as referenced by the authors of the Second Amendment, the revolutionaries of the time, what they were referring to is all of the people being well armed, and this is a concept that I think is really important, because if the playing field is leveled, if the majority of the people in a society are really well armed, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, and I really do, I see this, I know this is true, that most people are not full-blown psychopaths that are going to go out and murder and steal. Most people aren't. Most people see that.
No, that's a minority.
There's a minority of people that are like that. Unfortunately, right now we move that minority up into very high positions of power in this culture. But if you had a well-armed population where the communities came together on a regular basis to train, so that if there was a natural predator that came, you could effectively resist that threat. Whether it was an invading force or maybe these psychopaths that are spread out come together in some regime and want to try to take over a town. Well, surrounding towns could come together and make that go away. So say you've got like 5% psychopathic tendencies in a society and 95%, relatively normal people. If we're all really well armed, we could squash that. The problem that we have now is that the use of defensive force has been monopolized by a psychopathic regime that's ran by an international occult group, an occultocracy, an oligarchy. It's an occult group of people that have an agenda, in their own words, to depopulate us and create a one-world government. And a lot of people don't have that big picture in mind. And they could find it by researching history, reading books, reading these guys' own words, and looking into Agenda 21 and stuff. But even if they don't have that big picture in mind, we could still get back to these base principles of what's violent, what's not violent. Having a centralized police force that goes around enforcing things on mob rule, like, oh, the community says this plant's bad, so we're going to lock these people up for 20 years for using that plant. They're confusing man's law versus these natural inherent rights like Thomas Paine talked about, another really great person during the revolutionary time frame. And I think we really need to look back at the spirit of these people that were resisting the kingship and the monarch in the Americans' origins, because right now we got a very similar, and I would say even bigger threat, but it's of the same energy. Instead of a king that we're resisting this oligarchy that's doing way more to us than was done to them. And we're just allowing it to happen. I think we need to come together and organize and start beating these drums of these principles of what is and what, the difference between right and wrong. and organize and just rise up and maybe start building some societies that can just sidestep these guys. Because right now the main way that we're funding them is by our tax dollars and by people joining order-following institutions. So if we could compassionately communicate to people how violent that institution is and how they could just come over with us. We've got energy creation machines, and we're growing gardens, and we're purifying our water, and we're doing a lot of cool stuff over here, and we got a little renaissance happening, and we're raising our kids outside of indoctrination systems, and our kids are brilliant, and they're doing really awesome stuff in the world. And hey, this is another alternative. You can step out of this old paradigm and into this new one, and maybe we can kind of, like Buckminster Fuller said, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And I don't know. I mean, these guys aren't going to go down without fighting, but we could really take their numbers down to a small level by recruiting a bunch of these order followers to quit their jobs and join communities that are nonviolent, like Agorism.
Absolutely. And one thing I do want to say as well with this is with the so-called Illuminati or the Dark Occult, whatever name you want to give them, as a great speaker who was born in a satanic family, Jay Parker, he talks about how many of these people are born into this system, how many of them are actually more looking for a way out of this dark, psychotic world they've been born into, but they don't see it yet. They just see, for whatever reason, their family structure holding them back. I can't say no all about it, but I'd imagine it being tough to leave a group like that when they can pretty much have politicians, police forces, and corporations in their back pocket. Well, they are all of them anyway, so they're the ones who insert themselves into all the positions of influence and power. That's just where they naturally gravitate towards. So it's always going to be important to always have a hand out to them if they ever want to come back to sanity and also join free humanity. I hope that's something. I think that's going to be very important in the next few years, is not throwing them all under the bus. I think there's a lot of people who do want to leave. It's just all about, just as, say someone's is a cop and they decide to leave the order following institution that they're a part of. You've gained respect now and you're part of free humanity. It's the same thing with, I view a lot of the lower level Illuminati families. Granted, there's some psychopaths which I have no idea if they're ever going to change, and and there'll come a final hour when they have to make that decision. Either will they be destroyed, or will they heal? And that only they can make that decision. But we always need to have that hand out there if they're willing to take it. If they're not, so be it, and we'll defend ourselves. We'll do what we need to do within our natural law rights. But if they're willing to relook at themselves and relook at their situation and admit they were wrong, which is the most powerful thing you could ever say, is saying I was wrong. It's how healing occurs. Then by all means, you're more than welcome.
Absolutely. A lot of what holds these people down is we're in this scarcity-based model. And so a lot of them, they might even get to the point to where they'd admit, they'd be like, yeah, I can see that there's, maybe I'm a cop and I looked into 9/11 and, none of that makes sense. And I might have watched some YouTube videos and kind of see that there's psychopaths running the show that I'm I'm part of their institution and I'm an order follower in their institution, but then they might say, well, I got to pay my mortgage and I got to put food on the table and I got a kid maybe I'm putting through college or something like that. And so it has to come down to, initially at this point, because we haven't had the opportunity to build the abundance that's possible. Once we build more and more of this abundance, then it'll be easier for them to slide into an alternative model. But in the meantime, it really is it's a spiritual decision. Like they have to know that they're choosing to be fed by the beast so that they're choosing the path of the dark side, basically, so that they can have money. Yeah. You know, they're joining the dark forces so they can have money. And that needs to sink into them, you know, like I don't know how many cops out there probably know 9/11 was an inside job, but they're still cops. It's like, you know, really think about that, you know, man, girl, whoever, whatever. Think about that. You know that 9/11 was an inside job, but you're still a cop. you're like that.
It's like, how do you?
It's such a sad thing. I mean, I don't know if a lot of these people are spiritual or not, but they don't have something good waiting on them, for them on the other side. You know, it doesn't look good for them on the other side, being in that position, knowing that they're psychopaths at the top of their chain of command, but they just want that money, you know. I'd starve on the streets, but you don't have to starve on the streets. There's so much fertile land out there, and there's so many seeds, and there's so many seeds that can be planted, and there's so many communities to join, and there's so many things of value that people want. You could find a moral job and keep those tactical things. Keep your guns. Keep your tactical training. Quit your immoral job. Go join a community that's nonviolent, and use that training that you have and that spirit of defending people that you probably joined for in the first place, hopefully, unless you were just psychopathic to begin with. But that, you know, there's a lot of people who had good intentions when they joined the police force. Keep that spirit and go do something nonviolent. Go do something, you know, moral, and, you know, defend a community from an oppressive government or some other predator out there, you know?
Yeah, or even, you know, the less order following cops that there are, that'll allow more people to actually create these communities, because they won't feel this oppressive hand over them, watching over them all the time. I mean, the fact that you have raw dairy farmers that have been raided in the past, and I'm sure still do, is just paramount to show how completely out of control and just not a part of reality this is. It's just this. It doesn't make any sense, and it holds back people from doing voluntary, peaceful things well, and it is no right to be taken from them. And not to mention, I mean, hey, they could help defend a community like that, you know, and from any type of with all the training, like you said, they have, and then they could take that spirit of defense with them, which is a good reason a lot of them got into it anyway. And because many of us are just born into this confused society, we think our intentions match our actions when they really don't, because we haven't been taught things like natural law. We haven't been taught things like true, right, and wrong. I mean, we all have come from that, and that's a healing process. But I think it's just good to know that we all. How important healing is, and that how the door is open for any cop, any current military, to say, you know what, I don't support this machine anymore. This machine that's killed more people in this country than Iraq war has. I think it just exceeded that number this year. I mean, how do you not call that a war when a domestic body count is higher than a war that's been, you know, we're using militarized weaponry over there. We use bombs, excuse my language, tanks, machine guns. I mean, everything you can imagine over there. Things we probably don't even know that's used over there. It's just a complete waste of resources and a total, like you said, monopoly on violence, which the state loves to use. And bottom line with this is we have to stop giving our consent to these organizations, all of it. how quickly these organizations would fall if we stopped giving them our consent. People do not understand their power. I mean, these elite are parasites. They don't create, they control, and they destroy. Because they're not creators. We're the creators. They only can manipulate what we use or what we have created.
I think another aspect of it is our creations are being stolen, just like you said, are being stolen. And if we remove this sucking, leeching parasite, then abundance will start to flow. And that's when I talk to people about anarchy, agorism, voluntaryism, they're all saying the same thing. When I talk about a society that's not based in violence, people think that we'll have this unbelievable amount of scarcity and we'll have a bunch of people fighting for these limited resources. Well, anti-gravitic technology and free energy has been suppressed for at least 100 years this go around. If nobody knows about the energy machine of Joseph Newman or the ability to separate hydrogen from water, then really look into that. I mean, this isn't fantasy stuff. We're not talking about just some YouTube videos, perpetual motion machines. We're talking about some groundbreaking, revolutionary stuff that is being actively suppressed. The patent office is now it's a means to keep these things from coming to light. That's one of the main purposes of our patent office today, is to keep these types of things from actually happening. So there's an active resistance from the government to keep abundant systems from coming to fruition, because you've got reverse incentives. I mean, think about all these reverse incentives of big pharmaceutical companies, oil companies, and all these different things. Oil companies, pharmaceutical companies, they don't have guns, but governments do. So what do? They get in bed with governments who have guns, and they keep things in line. They keep their institutions going. The cure for cancer is cannabis, high concentration cannabis oil. But what's the government line on curing cancer? Well, we got all these different research foundations that we're supporting, that we're looking into it. It's right in front of your face. If you guys don't know about Rick Simpson oil and high concentration THC oil, Phoenix Tears, it cures cancer. I don't know, it's 80-something%. I don't know, some super high double-digit percentage of people who have stage 4 cancer are being cured right now with this oil. I mean, whether it's free energy, anti-gravitic technology, cures for cancer, there's so many unbelievable things that'll come to fruition when we remove the violent oppressors of government. And that's what people should. They don't think about the wild, wild west. Don't think about scarcity and gunfights. Think about abundance. Think about healing. Think about curing. It's unimaginable how much more beautiful this place would be if we didn't have psychopaths running the show.
I could give you a good small example of what would happen in an environment of love versus fear, because this is the fear element that is co-opting our entire world. A good example would be this group called the Urban Farming Guys out in Kansas City. They do some good work. They're basically a few families that have moved into the inner city, and they had a question. Can it be done here? Can we create a self-sufficient community in one of the roughest neighborhoods in America? And in about 3 years' time, they absolutely did it. They have hydroponics. They have plans for aquaponics. They make their own energy with their own made solar panels. They do composting. They have all these micro businesses. I mean, this one guy has a worm farm business. I mean, he made just out there, and this was a guy, I don't remember his exact personal story, but he was a guy who probably didn't have much hope out there. And you had some notorious metal scrappers who, just some of the most ruthless people you could imagine, because they were doing it because they needed to survive. Right or wrong, it was just an unfortunate reality of just living in the environment like that. And all these people said they felt love for the first time and community for the first time. And I mean, if you can shift people like that in an inner city, I mean. There was arson everywhere. There were gunshots everywhere. I mean, I remember seeing a video of these guys. They picked up a live round that just just went through the previous night. So they were living in a pretty really rough neighborhood, but they still changed it from the inside out. And that's very reflective of what we need to do. We need to change ourselves from the inside out. We need to change our minds first, how we think. And that's why it's so important to get the mental area down first, get that mental faculties back the way they should be. Learning things that do matter and can truly help us, not the system that we've been implanted with from birth. I mean, as Jay Parker likes to talk about, you're in a hypnagogic trance till about 6 or 7 years of your life where you are a total sponge. You have no discernment capabilities. Anything you hear or see, it gets registered within your consciousness, and it pretty much is like a truth for you. It just is. It's what you know. It becomes part of your makeup. So if you say it's just like an operating system, and not saying like exactly like computers. Mark Passio also, he talked about how we're like computers, and I absolutely agree with him on the level of information, how information comes in, how we make sense of that information, and how the information appears in the manifested reality. It's if we can change the information coming in, change that operating system, then our whole reality will change as a result of that. And we've all had bad operating systems. We've all had bad information. You can't create a beautiful world with bad information and a bad operating system. Try to run the best game on your computer, or best, I don't know, try running a art software or a music program. It won't work too well. You may have beautiful music going into that through that program, but because your operating system's a mess, you get massive bugs and glitches all over the place, and it always is incoherent.
So what we got to do is come up and basically fine-tune a systematic method to come to know that which is the trivium. To demystify that, it's just input information that we take in, which is, I'll stop there and talk about that for a minute. We need to try to be as eclectic as possible, as wide variety of information as possible that we can take in. And, we also have to keep in mind that time and energy, the attention, that's our currency of consciousness. So we don't need to waste our time on information that we've already found to be not true. But we have to fully explore it before we know it's true or not. So we take it in, put it through a processing where we identify patterns and contradictions. If we find contradictions, we should know that no contradictions exist in reality. So those contradictions aren't part of reality. And so sift out those. And then when we have the patterns, we can assimilate those patterns into different categories. And then the final step is put it back out into the world. And if everybody's doing that, taking in valuable information from wide varieties of sources, identifying patterns and contradictions, assimilating those into categories, and then putting back out those patterns of truth that we found, we could all start speaking more and more and more truth and work to align our perspectives more and more to that which is. And then we could come to know more about ourselves, how we work, our internal consciousness, and the principles of the universe and the world around us. And when we know how we work and how our environment works, we can navigate this system a lot better. And we can work in the light direction to get back towards, because to know that which is, eventually, one of the first things that you're going to learn is the difference between right and wrong, and that's just by observing cause and effect. You go do wrong to somebody, it's going to come back to you. Karma is a real thing. Whether it's that person's brother punching you in the face, that's a cause and effect thing. But it's gonna come back around, and we can learn reactionarily, or we can learn through suffering, or we can learn through wisdom. We don't have to put our hand in the fire to learn that it's wrong. We can observe it, see that or to learn that it'll hurt. We can observe it and see that would be painful and learn not to do it. But I think that's probably the first step, is come to know that which is. And then we can start working on these macro societal solutions. First, we got to fix ourselves. And then when we got the man in the mirror figured out, we can come together with other people and start growing gardens, shooting guns together, and working on energy machines.
Spaceships.
Why not, man? The Newman motor, come on. Like, what is that? The Newman motor's made of copper, iron, and dead car batteries, some bearings. We could put this stuff together. We could start and then if that's too complex, okay, solar panels, who cares? Put a wheel and some water. We can, the wheel work of nature is all around us, and we can tap into it and can start to disengage from this system and actively resist it and build a new, much more beautiful model. I think I think there's some hopeful solutions ahead of people, and we don't have to just get all scared about the negative stuff that's going on. There's predators out there, but they're not as imaginative as we are, and they're actually really small in numbers. They might have hijacked some of us and got them into their cult, but we can recruit them back to Team Freedom and take this planet back over real quick.
And just to say a simple, quick thing about fear. Fear only exists in your mind. Danger is real. Fear is a choice. We don't have to make that choice anymore of fear. That is the quickest way to division, to pain, to suffering, to violence, to anything disharmonious is through fear. It's fine to feel danger. And even there's times when maybe a tiny bit of fear is normal, but it's not about reacting to that fear. Reacting to fear is the worst thing to do, because then you're not using your whole three brains in conjunction. You're using more. Your consciousness slips into a reptilian brain, which is just a survival, the base instinct mindset. So you can't make higher thought choices. You can't use the limbic system, which is the emotional center. That gets turned off as well, because you're thinking in survival terms now. And I just want to also touch on the what you were talking about with the having an eclectic worldview. And another bonus of this is you get to see the unity in all things. It's much easier to understand each other when you see how there's so many things that are similar in all. They all have different parts of the puzzle, but they all make that puzzle. Just as we all human beings make up the planet Earth. We're making up the living inhabitants of planet Earth. This is the one time where perspective is important, because the more perspectives you gain, the more empathy you can learn. And you can start understanding other people and not being in a state of fear, because fear is also based upon lack of knowing things. What you go into the darkness, right? What you don't know what's there. You're afraid. You don't know if there's a predator there. You don't know what's in the darkness. You don't know if there's a trap. You don't know if there's a cliff. You have no idea. The fear of the unknown is such a basic fear we have, but it comes into play so much of our lives. We wouldn't expect it to be there, but it does turn off it causes so much unnecessary suffering when you could just be aware of the danger but move past it.
I think that Richard Grove and Mark Passio both had some really powerful things to say about fear. And I don't know if either one of them originated this, but there's nothing new under the sun. They put these words in simple terms, and Richard said in one of his Peace Revolution, or a few of them in his podcast, he said that fear is an invitation to learn. And that makes so much sense. Fear is an invitation to learn. And Mark said that it's not that we shouldn't have fear, it's that we should act in spite of fear, not in reaction to fear. It's not that we should act from the framework of fear. We should act from the framework of love and then push through in spite of fear. Not allow fear to control our behavior, but to have love be the compass of our behavior, and in spite of fear, push forward through it. Fear is something that pops up on our radar. And it's like, okay, that's something, either I don't know a lot about, or I do know a lot about and it's terrifying, so there's something I should do. And once you know what the best thing to do is, then you follow through with that action. And as long as that decision-making process is coming from the framework of love for all beings. If our compass is a compassionate love for all beings, where we put our next foot is always going to be a good thing. and it's that. But it takes a lot of courage, because sometimes the best thing to do is to risk your life to defend other people from violence, and that is sometimes that's got to be done in spite of fear and from the framework of love. And that's the kind of fighting spirit we need in people right now. And that's happened in this region of the world before. During the Revolutionary War, Thomas Paine said that, I don't remember the ratio, he said it was something like one revolutionary or one individual fighting for liberty is more valuable than 1,000 ruffians, the redcoats. Another way to word it in today's terms is one person fighting from the framework of love is more powerful for liberty and independence and freedom, is more powerful than 1,000 order followers fighting for a paycheck.
Mm-hmm. Because when you stand upon principle, it's much harder to take someone down from principle than someone down from a paycheck.
Absolutely.
As much as money can motivate people, there's always that point. It can be that breaking point where they're just like, I don't think this is worth it anymore. Mm-hmm. With a principle, it's always worth it because that's the core of who you are. I mean, that is you. To abandon that is to abandon yourself anyway. Well, so you would never think of doing that.
Yeah, it's truth. And to abandon it is to abandon truth.
Exactly. It's to abandon consciousness, to abandon true spiritual evolution, which is the path we can take. I mean, just imagine being able to travel the stars and meet with different ET races and, work together and learn things from them, and they can learn things from us. I mean, it is so, and we're just talking about our universe. I mean, my God, I heard a recent statistic was for every grain of sand on this planet, there's at least 10,000 stars in this universe. And there's a lot of sand. There's a lot of sand. I mean, life is flowing everywhere. It's not this limited framework. It is everywhere. The nature of creation is life everywhere, and to experience itself from many different perspectives. It's not to be stuck in a suffering, limited point of view. That's not what the Creator wants for us, nor should we want for ourselves. And you see that again and again with these systems and how energy and technology is held, because it's meant to crush the imagination and keep you in a state of status quo always. I mean, how quickly any of these paradigms, if they really got out there, it would just crack all the other paradigms open. Like you talk about the Joseph Newman energy device, if that got widespread, how much would that just crush the oil monopolies? I mean, look at the GMO awareness right now. Look what that's doing. I think this past week, Chipotle, the restaurant Chipotle went completely non-GMO. And that's going to have a massive ripple effect. And that's just in that area.
It's a good market response, I mean, when people come out and speak the truth and people start changing their behavior based on the truth that they hear, and they start buying less of this, they're shutting McDonald's down. Chipotle, which unfortunately I think is somehow owned by McDonald's or not, I don't know. But regardless, I mean, there's market responses that are gonna come out in a positive way if people start learning that which is and acting accordingly. They're not going to buy that crap food anymore, so the companies that sell it are going to have to change.
Mm-hmm. And then we could eventually just get to the point where we're all growing our own food anyway.
That's it.
Don't have to even worry about any of this.
That's it.
I mean, that'd be the best. That's the most optimal route to go. I mean, if you start researching hydroponics or aquaponics these days and vertical farming, the amount of abundance you can create in a small area, people just don't know about it. And if you imagine powering that with that said energy machine you talked about. So you're gathering unlimited energy, creating almost unlimited amounts of food in a small space, and that's just that. And that's just with that's not even all the unreleased technologies we're talking about here. That's just with the stuff that we can create now. I mean, that's amazing to think about.
Right.
It's just it's just like there's like an inverse to almost everything. We need to get to the proper use of everything, not the destructive. I mean, I remember reading this thing. I know I mentioned it, mentioned this to you, Zach, before, but talking about, I think there was a German scientist in the early 1900s. He was talking about two types of energy, really, and this goes in with orgone energy. And if no one's familiar with orgone energy, just Google Wilhelm Reich, spelled W-I-L or WILHELM
Wilhelm
YouTube
Reich.
Wilhelm Reich. Guy was a genius, but crap! I almost kind of get into the orgone talk, and I get a little thrown off. I apologize for that.
Well, I mean, we're in the second hour now. Do you want to wrap it up, or do you want to continue on another hour? I mean, I could talk about orgone energy and the dynamics of the Newman motor, and we could talk more about solutions and stuff, or what do you want to do?
How about we wrap it up for now, and we continue all of that next time for the next podcast, because that'd be a great transition thing to go into, and there's plenty to go into all those topics. No shortage of good stuff to get into with those.
Cool. Well, I think this was successful, man. I think we planted a lot of proverbial seeds, and I maybe encouraged some people to plant some literal seeds, and maybe we can outgrow the status quo.
Exactly. Be our own media.
Absolutely.
The dinosaur media is done.
Boom.
We're the media. The people are the media.
Boom.
Imagine people doing this everywhere.
Everyone
this is just us in our houses talking at, midnight, 1 a.m. through a little like electronic format. This is a beauty of technology and how we can become our own media. I mean, we'll be eventually we could become a resounding voice that where the mainstream media, you don't even know they're there anymore because you just hear us
beating the drums of truth louder than the drums of deception.
Pretty much. Louder than the rotten drums of deception. things are falling apart.
Pumping the signal. It's pumping the signal louder than the noise, right?
Exactly.
Well, all right, my friend. I guess we'll sign off.
All right, and it's been thanks for everyone for listening in, and I look forward to many more podcasts with this. This was touching a lot of bases and got some great new material to start with for next podcast.
Cool. Thanks to all who tuned in. Take care.
No master, no slave.